Welcome to the Music Habits Podcast, episode 64.
Welcome to the Ableton and Music Habits Podcast. Actionable music production tips to take your music to the next level. And now, your host, Jason Timothy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about music production and songwriting. And although the two of them are very similar, there's some distinct differences that can really affect your productivity when making music. So let's get into it. So if you're under the impression that songwriting and producing are cut from the same creative cloth, you're not entirely off base. They often walk hand in hand, where the more you produce, the more songs you tend to wrap up. But there's a trap lurking that I'm keen to help you sidestep if I can. So let's first dissect where these two artistic endeavors converge and where they diverge. See, producing encompasses the art of sound selection, whether through samples, presets, or sound design, along with the subsequent processing of these sounds. It extends to the delicate dance of arranging and mixing. For some, mastering may find its place here, although I firmly advocate for professional mastering whenever possible. Now, here's the catch with producing. It can lead to overthinking and a perpetual cycle of circling ideas, keeping you busy, but not finishing very much. A lot of people fall into the trap of equating time spent in their DAW with being productive. And the truth is, tinkering endlessly doesn't push your ideas across the finish line. It's actually a procrastination tactic disguised as productivity. Producers often forget the end game. The goal is not to create sounds and grooves, but to craft releasable songs. Production without a foundation in songwriting, no matter how experimental the song's going to be, often becomes a mere exercise in sound crafting without a purpose. I want to make sure that you don't get lost in production techniques just because it's new and exciting to you. If we chase every new production tip and trick, we lose sight of the song we're trying to craft. This is like making a movie based specifically on special effects, but having no story. So you want to recognize this trap before it becomes a problem. Now, throughout history, songwriting and producing were distinctly different roles until recently. Traditionally, songwriters would sit down with a guitar or piano, weave together chord sequences that evoked emotions, paving the way for vocal melodies and lyrics. The song would organically take shape with an intro versus a bridge, a chorus, and usually a middle 8 section. At least that's what the Beatles used to label it. Once a songwriting chapter concluded, then they'd venture into the studio, collaborating with a producer and engineer to bring their song to life. This process meant artists entered the studio armed with an actual song, not merely a riff or a vague idea. Now, of course, there are exceptions. I can get into that later, but this is generally the way that songs were crafted. Even in the realm of electronic music, iconic bands like Depeche Mode and Erasure often initiate their songs on a guitar or a piano before delving into the production side of things and filling in all those details. Now, for many, the studio is transformed into the guitar and piano of the future. It's like its own instrument. Brian Eno was a master at using the studio as an instrument, collaborating with bands to create groundbreaking albums. But, and it's a crucial but, the bands he worked with brought their box of songwriting skills to the table, creating a symbiosis between songwriting and production mindsets. Now, here's where aspiring producers aiming to craft their stellar songs might be stumbling. The habit of showing up to the studio empty-handed, immediately donning the producer hat. It's like stepping onto a tightrope without a safety net. Without a clear idea, you can find yourself painted into a production corner, kind of wrestling with these disjointed ideas that refuse to harmonize into a coherent track. Now, I've fallen prey to this too, so this is something all of us run the risk of falling into, especially in modern times. Despite my own roots in songwriting as a guitarist in bands, the allure of new plugins often tempts me to shelve my songwriting fundamentals, and the result is usually a collection of cool, quirky sounds, but no real purpose for them. Now, if you read my previous work, you know that I'm really into sound design and experimentation, and devoting specific days to doing just that, and then later molding those ideas into more structured song ideas. But this has to be balanced with some type of structured blueprint to input those ideas into that actually benefit a song. So if you're itching to complete more songs rather than wandering in the vastness of production without direction, I've got a few suggestions for you. One, you want to start simple. Numerous musical success stories attest to the power of a song that sounds great on a basic instrument. Usually that's a guitar or piano. And this foundation often transcends into greatness when you add all the intricate production. The reverse, however, doesn't really hold true. Ideas that are birthed from unconventional production techniques can really struggle to find resonance when stripped down to the fundamental instruments, like a piano or a guitar. So you want to begin with, basic ideas, strum a few chords, or experiment on a piano, coming up with melodies before injecting all your unique production techniques into the song. If playing an instrument's not really your jam, just use a piano sound when you draw on your MIDI. And if your melody or chord progression doesn't sound great when you convert it over to the new sound, then that usually just means you need to simplify the chord progression or the melody that you made, and it should work just fine. The second thing I would suggest is when you're using samples, make sure you tune those samples so that when you're playing on top of them, everything is in proper key. There's nothing worse than having a really inspired idea that starts from a sample or a loop that's not tuned correctly. You might not notice it right away, but all of a sudden it's going to sound all kinds of wrong once you start stacking ideas that are in tune with this part that's not in tune with your song. So third, I just want to reiterate the idea that if you start with kind of traditional sounds, you're going to have a much easier time figuring out if you've actually got a song. So what you want to do is kind of use basic sounds to craft into some sort of a demo. And then you can move that towards replacing sounds and turning that into a final track. This is especially true if you're using vocals as well, because vocals usually need some sort of a structure to sit on. So crafting a demo with more simple ideas, and these simple ideas could be just regular sounds that work well for your style, and then you can kind of use more unique sound afterwards. This way you make sure that you've actually got a song before you start getting into the production mindset. In the grand scheme of things, understanding the delicate dance between songwriting and production is going to be really crucial. So you want to start with simplicity, master the art of showing up with a clear idea, and let the nuances of production enhance your melodies rather than obscure them. Now, this doesn't mean you have to show up knowing exactly what you're doing every time you sit down at the studio. You want to understand that crafting a song is your first goal. It's like creating a blueprint to a house you're going to build. Without a blueprint, you're building on something that has no foundation. And if your track has no foundation, then you know that you're basing it strictly on production rather than songwriting. So it's really important that you balance the two. With that said, guys, if you're benefiting from these podcasts, you'll absolutely love my 2 best-selling books, The Mental Game of Electronic Music Production and The Process for Electronic Music Producers. You can also check out my Ableton courses and instruments at musicsoftwaretraining.com/products. And if you're looking for personal guidance with your music production or Ableton, you could set up a free chat with me to go over exactly what your best next steps are to create the best music of your life. If this interests you, just go to musicsoftwaretraining.com/private-coaching. And with that, have a fantastic day and happy music making.